Hi, and welcome to Read to Me, Mrs. Avignon. Today I'm going to be reading Lapin Plays Possum, Trickster Tales from the Louisiana Bayou. The story I'm going to be reading today is Bouki Over a Barrel. Down by the boggy bayous of Louisiana lived critters of all shapes and sizes. Some were as big as bullies, and others were puny as a picayune penny. Some were as sharp as a bee stinger, and others were duller than a wooden nickel. There were those that came into the world with a silver spoon to suck on, while others got nothing but a cypress splinter. Take Compere Bouki, for instance. He cast a shadow big as a barnyard. He owned a farming field full of delta soil so rich that if you planted a penny at sunrise, you could pick $1 before sundown. But as for smarts, he must have been hiding behind the barn door when they were passed out. Now Compere Lapin, on the other hand, wasn't but knee-high to a blackberry bush, and his cupboards were so bare he could stretch himself out and sleep in them. He could find more ways to get out of work than there are fleas on a possum. But Lapin, he'd got an extra helping of smarts. And so things didn't always turn out as you might expect. One summer, Bouki got over-ambitious when he planted his cotton field. There was so much plowing and planting and tending and hoeing to be done in that hot Louisiana sun that by harvest time, he was so pooped he could barely blink an eye. As the cotton balls started popping out around him like firecrackers on New Year's Eve, he knew he had to get himself some help. Now Lapin, who'd spent the whole summer lollygagging in the shade of the sassafras tree, had a way of showing up at times like these. And Compere Bouki was so desperate that against his better judgment, he decided to ask that half-pint hare for help. "Say, Lapin," he asked, "what would you take to help me harvest this cotton crop?" Lapin shaded his eyes and surveyed the cotton field that glimmered like a snowdrift all the way to the bayou. Knowing he could hoodwink Bouki quicker than he could sneeze, he said, "Whoo-wee! That's a heap of cotton. I'd have to get at least 1/8 of it to make it worth my slaving in the hot sun." Bouki scratched his ear. He'd never been very good at figuring. "I'll give you 1/4, he said, being as 4 was littler than 8. Lapin's ears pricked up as he followed Bouki's line of thinking. "You drive a hard bargain, Bouki," he said, "but I wouldn't want to take advantage of you. I suppose I could do it for 1/3. "Half," said Bouki, thinking that half had a 2 in it, and that was smaller than a 3. "Deal," said Lapin, hiding a grin. "Bien bon," said Bouki, figuring he'd gotten the best of the bargain. "Here's you a sack, and here's me a sack. Let's get to work." Now, Lapin couldn't resist playing tricks on Bouki any more than he could turn down a piece of king cake on Mardi Gras. "I can't wait to get to work," he said sweetly, "but looks to me like we'll be needing something to celebrate with at the end of the harvest. What say we treat ourselves to a barrel of rum cake?" "Oh, all right," grumbled Bouki. He loved nothing better than rum cake himself. "Go ahead and get some butter to go with it." So Lapin hopped off to the store and charged a nice fat barrel of sweet rum cake to Bouki's account, and a nice fat barrel of butter, too. He stashed them under the cool bank of the bayou so the butter wouldn't melt in the sun. Then they set to picking cotton. Bouki went pick, 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 and pluck, pluck, pluck. But Lapin went pick, pluck, pick, sack had barely begun to bulge before he pricked up his elongated ears and called, "Huh? What's that you say?" "What?" said Bouki from the next row. "There it is again. One of my sisters is calling me to a baptism. She wants me to be the godfather to her baby and help name the little thing." "I didn't hear nothing," said Bouki. "Course you didn't. That's 'cause you got such puny ears," said Lapin. "Go on then," growled Compere Bouquet. "I don't suppose you can turn down an invitation to a Paran." So Lapin dropped his sack and hightailed it out of the field. But he didn't go to any baptism. No, he circled round and headed straight for the bayou and that barrel of butter. Naturally, he had to have something to spread it on, so he cut himself a thick slice of rum cake, too. Oh, that butter was so smooth, so creamy, that cake so sweet and spicy that he just had to have another slice, and another after that. Finally, when his belly couldn't hold another bite, he decided it was time to get back to cotton picking. Bouki's sack was nearly full by then, but there was plenty left to pick. "About time you got back," he said. "What'd they name that baby?" They named it Comme say," said Lapin. Bouki shook his saggy head. "What are folks thinking, naming a baby just begun?" Lapin shrugged and got to picking. Pick, pluck, pick, pluck. Long about noon, Lapin's sack was still as empty as a hatched egg, and even though his belly was fuller than a squirrel's cheeks, all that cake and all that butter kept dancing through his mind. So he lifted his head and cocked his ear. "Coming!" he called out into thin air. "Who dat?" said Bouki, shading his eyes from the sun. Lapin sighed. "This time it's my little brother calling. I've got to be a godfather again." "Ain't they got enough of you rabbits already?" Bouki sighed. "Well, go on then." And he went back to picking. This time, Compere Lapin scraped the bottom of the butter barrel with the last crumbs of the rum cake. His belly was so full he could barely waddle on back to the cotton field. "They named it Tofini," Lapin told Bouki with a glint in his eye. "All done, 'cause I ain't going to be a Paran to no more babies." Come quitting time, Compere Bouki dragged sack after sack out of the field, while Lapin had a few measly clumps of cotton floating in the bottom of his. Bouki limped toward the bayou, his mouth watering. "The only thing that kept me going all day," he groaned, "was the thought of all that sweet rum cake and all that cool, creamy butter." But when he hoisted the barrels up from the bank of the bayou, they were emptier than the church basket come the day after Christmas. Bouki swung a suspicious look at Lapin and pulled himself up till he towered over him. "Why, you little scoundrel!" "What?" said Lapin, acting innocent as a newborn baby. "Wait till I get my hands on that puny neck of yours." But just then, Bouki's mouth opened in a barrel-sized yawn, and his eyelids clamped shut, and he fell into a standing-up, tuckered-out sleep. All that rich food and hard labor had made Lapin drowsy, too. So, putting a little distance between himself and Bouki, he lay down and dozed off as well. But the late afternoon sun blazed down on Lapin's overstuffed belly, and all that butter inside of it began to melt. He woke up in an oily puddle big as the Gulf of Mexico. "Uh-oh," said Lapin, scampering off to the bayou to clean himself up. Then, when he saw Bouki still asleep in his tracks, a trick popped into Lapin's head like popcorn kernel in a frying pan. He commenced to pushing and shoving on Bouki's broad backside till Bouki fell right smack dollop into that puddle of butter. Then Lapin smeared that oily mess all over Bouki's mouth and paws till he was greasier than a politician's palm. shaking him awake, Lapin cried. Why, Bouki, just look at you. You're the one that ate that butter while I was off at the baptisms. Bouki blinked and licked his lips. I didn't do it, I swear, Lapin. A likely story, said Lapin. Here you sit in a whole puddle of evidence. I surely don't recollect it, said Bouki, unless sunstroke put me out of my head. Humph, said Lapin. A deal's a deal. You owe me half a barrel of butter and half a barrel of rum cake, too. Compere Bouki couldn't do nothing but scratch his greasy old head. So that's how the rascal Lapin got to have his butter and his rum cake not once, but twice. Not to mention 1/2 of Bouki's cotton crop. It just goes to show there's more than one way to crop a cotton field, especially for a picayunish prankster like Compere Lapin. And that's the end of that story. Thanks for listening.